Thousands of years ago, in the land of ancient Egypt, a great and powerful Pharaoh ruled with an iron fist. The Hebrew people, the children of Israel, were his slaves. They built his cities, carried his stones, and suffered under his cruelty every single day. But deep in the heart of Pharaoh, a dark fear was growing. The Hebrew people were multiplying too fast. He was afraid that one day they would rise up and overthrow his kingdom. So Pharaoh made a terrible and heartless decree. Every Hebrew baby boy that is born must be thrown into the Nile River and drowned. The cries of mothers filled the land of Egypt. Families lived in terror. But in one small Hebrew home, a brave mother named Jochebed had just given birth to a beautiful baby boy. When she looked into his eyes, she knew this child was special. This child was chosen. For 3 months. She hid him, keeping him silent, keeping him safe. But she could not hide him forever. Soldiers were everywhere. So with trembling hands and a breaking heart, Jochebed made a basket from bulrushes and reeds. She sealed it with tar and pitch to keep out the water. She wrapped her precious baby boy inside, kissed his tiny face one last time, and placed the basket into the flowing waters of the Nile River. His older sister Miriam followed quietly along the riverbank, watching, waiting, praying. The basket floated gently through the reeds. Then a royal procession arrived at the river. Pharaoh's own daughter had come to bathe in the Nile. Suddenly, she heard a sound, a soft cry. She looked and saw the basket floating among the reeds. Her heart stopped. She reached out, opened the basket, and there he was, a tiny, beautiful Hebrew baby boy, looking up at her with tearful eyes. Her heart melted with compassion. She knew he was a Hebrew child. She knew what her father had commanded, but she could not let him die. At that moment, Miriam stepped forward bravely and said, "Shall I go and find a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby for you?" Pharaoh's daughter agreed, and Miriam ran straight to her own mother. The very mother who had let him go was now hired by Pharaoh's daughter to nurse her own son. God had made a way. God had protected him. When the child grew older, Jochebed brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." The baby who was meant to die was now living in the palace of the very king who wanted him dead. This was no accident. This was no coincidence. From the very beginning, God had a plan for Moses, a plan to rescue an entire nation, a plan that would shake the mightiest empire on earth. The story of Moses had only just begun. Moses grew up in the most powerful palace on earth. He wore royal robes, ate at the king's stable, and was educated by the finest teachers in all of Egypt. He learned the language of kings, the art of war, the wisdom of Egyptian scholars. From the outside, his life looked perfect. He had everything: wealth, power, and privilege. But deep inside, something was always stirring, a question he could never fully silence. Who am I, really? One day, when Moses had grown into a strong young man, he made a decision that would change everything. He left the comfort of the palace and went out to see his people, the Hebrew slaves. And what he saw broke him. He saw his own people, men with bleeding backs, women carrying impossible loads, children crying from hunger and exhaustion. Egyptian slave masters stood over them with whips, striking them without mercy. Moses watched in silence, his fists clenching, his heart burning. Then he saw something that pushed him over the edge. An Egyptian officer was brutally beating a Hebrew slave. Moses looked to the left. He looked to the right. No one was watching. And in one explosive moment, Moses struck the Egyptian down. The man fell to the ground and did not rise again. Moses looked at what he had done. His hands were shaking. He quickly buried the body in the sand and walked away. He thought no one had seen. He was wrong. The next day, Moses went out again and saw two Hebrew men fighting each other. He stepped in and said, "Why are you hitting your own brother?" But the man turned on Moses and said, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Are you going to kill me like you killed that Egyptian?" Moses froze. The secret was... Ow! Word spread fast, and it reached the ears of Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh was furious. He gave the order, Moses must die. In one day, Moses had gone from prince to fugitive. He ran out of Egypt, across the burning desert, with nothing but the clothes on his back. The man who once had servants now had no one. The man who once lived in a palace now had no roof over his head. He ran until he reached the land of Midian, a wild and distant place far from Egypt. Exhausted and alone, Moses sat down beside a well. He had no plan, he had no future, or so he thought. As he sat there, 7 young women came to the well to draw water for their father's flock. But a group of rough shepherds pushed them away and tried to take the water for themselves. Moses saw what was happening. Even in his broken state, he could not stand by and watch injustice. He stood up, confronted the shepherds, drove them away, and helped the young women water their flock. When the women returned home earlier than expected, their father, a priest of Midian named Reuel, also called Jethro, asked them, "How did you return so quickly today?" They told him about the Egyptian man who had rescued them at the well. Jethro said, "Where is he? Why did you leave him? Go, invite him to eat with us." Moses came to the home of Jethro. He was welcomed, fed, and given rest. He was a stranger in a foreign land, but he had found a home. In time, Moses married Jethro's daughter. She bore him a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land." Years passed. Moses settled into the quiet life of a shepherd. Every day he led the flocks through the wilderness. The palace was a distant memory. Egypt felt like another lifetime. The cries of the Hebrew slaves still echoed somewhere in the back of his mind. But what could one man do? He was nobody now. Just a shepherd. Just a man hiding from his past. But God never forgot Moses. And God never forgot his people. Back in Egypt, the old Pharaoh had died, but the suffering of the Israelites did not end. It got worse. The Bible says their groaning rose up to God. Their cries reached heaven, and God heard. God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God looked upon his people, and God acted. One ordinary day, Moses was leading his flock through the wilderness near a mountain called Horeb, the mountain of God. Suddenly, something strange caught his eye. A bush was on fire. Moses stopped. He stared. The bush was burning, but it was not burning up. The flames danced and blazed, but the bush was not turning to ash. Moses said to himself, "I must go and see this remarkable sight. Why is this bush not burning up?" He took a step closer, and then a voice came from the middle of the fire. "Moses, Moses." Moses froze. Every hair on his body stood on end. He whispered, "Here I am." And the voice said, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." Moses hid his face. He was terrified to look at God. And God spoke to him, "I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I know how much they are suffering, so I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now I am sending you to Pharaoh. You will bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Moses stood there in the desert, barefoot before a burning bush, hearing words that shook his entire world. After 40 years of hiding, after everything he had done and everything he had run from, God was calling him back, not as a fugitive, not as a failure, but as a deliverer, the child who was pulled from the river. The prince who became a shepherd was now being called to become something far greater. The story of Moses was just getting started. Moses stood before the burning bush, barefoot on holy ground, the voice of God still echoing in his ears. God had just told him, "Go back to Egypt. Go back to the place you fled. Go back to the most powerful empire on earth, and tell Pharaoh to let my people go." But Moses was afraid. He looked at his hands, the hands of a shepherd, rough and calloused from years in the wilderness. He thought about who he was now. Not a prince, not a warrior, just a man who had been hiding for 40 years. And so Moses did what many of us do when God calls us to something impossible. He made excuses. Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Who am I that I should bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God answered him simply and powerfully, "I will be with you." But Moses was not satisfied. He asked it again. "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' What shall I tell them?" And God said to Moses, "I am who I am. Tell them I am has sent me to you. Not I was, not I will be. I am the eternal, ever-present, all-powerful God, the one who exists outside of time, the one who needs no introduction, no explanation, no permission from any Pharaoh on earth." But Moses still hesitated. He said, "What if they do not believe me? What if they say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" God said, "What is that in your hand?" Moses looked down. "A staff," he said. God said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw his shepherd's staff to the ground, and it became a snake. Moses jumped back in fear. God said, "Reach out your hand and grab it by the tail." Moses reached out, grabbed the snake, and it became a staff again in his hand. Then God said, "Now put your hand inside your cloak." Moses put his hand inside his cloak, and when he pulled it out, his hand was white as snow, covered in leprosy. God said, "Put your hand back inside your cloak." Moses obeyed, and when he pulled it out again, it was completely healed, restored like the rest of his skin. God said, "If they do not believe the first sign, they will believe the second. And if they do not believe either sign, take water from the Nile and pour it on the ground, and it will become blood." God had given Moses supernatural power. But Moses had one more excuse. He said, "Lord, I have never been a good speaker. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. And God said, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. But Moses still pushed back. He said, please, Lord, send someone else. And the Bible says God's anger burned against Moses. But in his mercy, God gave Moses a solution. His brother Aaron, a man known for his ability to speak, was already on his way to meet Moses in the desert. God said, he will speak to the people for you. You will be like God to him, putting words in his mouth. Now go, take this staff in your hand with which you will perform the signs. The excuses were over. The time had come. Moses went back to his father-in-law Jethro and said, let me return to my people in Egypt to see if any of them are still alive. Jethro said, go, and I wish you well. Moses gathered his wife Zipporah and his sons, put them on a donkey, and headed back toward Egypt. After 40 years, Moses was going home, but not empty-handed. He carried a staff that had turned into a snake. He carried the name of I Am. He carried the promise, I will be with you. As Moses traveled, God spoke to him again. When you return to Egypt, perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. God was warning Moses. This would not be easy. Pharaoh would not simply open the gates and say, take your people and leave. There would be a battle unlike anything the world had ever seen. Not a battle of swords or armies, but a battle between the God of heaven and the gods of Egypt. As Moses approached Egypt, his brother Aaron came running through the desert to meet him. The two brothers embraced after years apart. Moses told Aaron everything, every word God had spoken, every sign he had been given, and together they walked into Egypt. They gathered all the elders of Israel, the leaders of God's people. Aaron spoke. Moses performed the signs before their eyes. The staff became a snake. The hand turned leprous and was healed. And when the people saw it, they believed. They bowed their heads and worshipped God. After 400 years of slavery, after generations of suffering and silence, hope had finally arrived. Moses and Aaron stood at the edge of a new chapter. Tomorrow, they would walk into the palace of the most powerful man on earth. Tomorrow, they would stand before Pharaoh and deliver a message straight from the throne of heaven. Let my people go. The battle for freedom was about to begin. Moses and Aaron walked boldly into Pharaoh's palace and delivered God's message, let my people go. Pharaoh laughed. He said, who is the Lord that I should obey him? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. So God sent the plagues. First, the Nile River turned to blood. Every fish died. Every drop of water became red. Then millions of frogs invaded every home, every bedroom, every kitchen in Egypt. The gnats covered every person and every animal. Then swarms of flies destroyed the entire land. Pharaoh's own magicians looked at each other and said, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh refused to listen. God struck the livestock of Egypt and every animal died, but not one animal belonging to Israel was harmed. Then painful boils broke out on every Egyptian person and every animal still alive. Then a devastating hailstorm destroyed every crop, every tree, every plant in the fields. Then locusts came and ate everything the hail had left behind. Then a darkness so thick you could feel it with your hands covered all of Egypt for 3 days. But the Israelites had light in their homes. 9 plagues, 9 chances for Pharaoh to let the people go. 9 times his heart was hardened. Then God told Moses, one final plague is coming, the most devastating of all. At midnight I will pass through Egypt, and every firstborn son will die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh on his throne to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon. But for Israel I will pass over. God gave Moses specific instructions. Every Hebrew family must take a perfect lamb, kill it at twilight, and paint its blood on the top and sides of their doorframe. That night they must eat the lamb with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, fully dressed, sandals on their feet, stuff in and ready to leave. When I see the blood on your door, I will pass over you. That night the Israelites obeyed. They painted their doorframes with blood. They ate their meal in silence. And at midnight God moved through Egypt. In every Egyptian home a cry broke out, because every firstborn had died, from the palace of Pharaoh to the poorest house in the land. Egypt woke up to the sound of screaming. There was not a single house where someone was not dead. Pharaoh rose in the night, and for the first time he called for Moses and Aaron and said, "Get out! Leave my people. Go worship your God. Take your flocks, take your herds, and go, and bless me also." After 400 years of slavery, the door was open. The Israelites moved quickly. They took their dough before it could rise, wrapped it in cloth, and carried it on their shoulders. They asked their Egyptian neighbors for silver and gold and clothing, and the Egyptians gave it to them freely because they were desperate for them to leave. 600,000 men plus women and children walked out of Egypt that night. A massive crowd, 2 million people moving through the darkness towards freedom. God led them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. They were free. But freedom would be tested immediately. Pharaoh watched from his palace as the dust of 2 million people disappeared into the horizon, and then his heart hardened one final time. He called his commanders. He ordered his chariots, 600 of the best chariots in Egypt, plus all the other chariots, with officers on every one, thundered across the desert in pursuit. The Israelites looked up and saw the Egyptian army coming. Behind them, Pharaoh's chariots. In front of them, the Red Sea. They had nowhere to go. They turned on Moses in panic and cried, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die in the desert?" Moses stood up and shouted, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Then God told Moses, "Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water." Moses stretched out his hand over the Red Sea, and God drove the sea back with a strong east wind all that night. The water divided. The sea stood up like walls on the right and on the left, and the Israelites walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground. When the Egyptian army followed them into the sea, God looked down and threw them into confusion. He made their chariot wheels fall off so that they had difficulty driving. The Egyptians said, "Let us get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them." But it was too late. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea again, and the water flowed back and covered the chariots and the horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh. Not one of them survived. Israel stood on the other side and watched the bodies of their oppressors wash up on the shore. And the people feared the Lord, put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. Miriam, the same sister who had watched baby Moses float down the Nile, took a tambourine in her hand and led all the women in dancing and singing. Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into thee. They were free, truly free. But the journey was not over. God led them into the wilderness, and the people grumbled, "There is no water." God gave them water. They grumbled again, "There is no food." God sent manna from heaven every single morning, bread that appeared on the ground like dew, and in the evenings he sent quail for meat. When they were thirsty again, God told Moses, "Strike the rock with his staff." Moses struck the rock and water poured out. Every single need God met. Every single time God provided, until finally they came to the foot of Mount Sinai. The mountain shook. Thunder crashed. Lightning split the sky. Fire covered the beat. A trumpet blast grew louder and louder until the people trembled. Moses went up into the cloud and the fire and stood before God. And there on the mountain, God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, the moral foundation of all civilization. "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not worship idols. You shall not misuse the name of God. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not lie. You shall not covet what belongs to your neighbor." 10 laws written by the finger of God on tablets of stone. Simple, clear, eternal. Moses came down from that mountain with his face glowing so brightly from the presence of God that the people were afraid to look at him. He had to wear a veil just to speak to them. This is what happens when a person truly encounters God. They are never the same again. Moses started life as a baby meant to die floating in a basket on the Nile. He became a prince, a fugitive, a shepherd, and finally a deliverer. He was not perfect, he was upright. He made excuses. He lost his temper, but he kept saying yes to God. And through that one willing man, God set 2 million people free. The story of Moses and the Exodus is not just an ancient story. It is a story about what God does for people who are trapped, suffering, and crying out for help. He hears, he comes down, he fights, he delivers. Whatever Egypt you are in today, whatever is holding you captive, the God of Moses is still the same God. He still parts seas. He still makes a way where there is no way. He is still I am. And he has not forgotten you.